On this fourth Sunday of Lent, we have reasons for rejoicing. On this fourth Sunday of Lent, we have reasons for rejoicing. Let's go back to the book of Genesis. In Genesis, we have God, which we now know is the Holy Trinity, right? And everything that gets created through Jesus Christ. We have God create Adam out of clay, and he breathes life into him. And God's creation takes 6 days, and then there's that seventh day, that number of completion that takes care of all. It makes the whole week end with God, and it says it's a Sabbath, it's a day of rest. But now, after creation, it becomes a day of rest for us, where those 6 days of creation that God used, we now use those 6 days of creation and then have the expectation that on the seventh day, the Shabbat for the Jewish people believed that that represents the remainder, the part that we don't know what to do with. We cannot handle everything out in the world. Our plans will not cover everything. So there's always that room at the end, that fringe, that place where things don't quite fit, that God can somehow pull in, draw in, and make it whole, because we know that we can't. Our plans don't make room for everything. And so that seventh day, that Sabbath, the Jews understood that to be God's day, where his work could be done on that seventh day. And so we rest and we give it to God through adoration, through praising God, through worshiping for God, especially on that day of the Sabbath. Now we turn to John's Gospel. The Gospel for today is John's Gospel in the 9th chapter, first 41 verses. And we have Jesus walking through Jerusalem and coming across a blind man. Now Jesus, who was there at the beginning of creation, for the creation of Adam, Jesus now bends down and takes some dried out clay that no longer has life in it, and he breathes on it, right? He spits on it and he revivifies this clay, and now the clay is malleable, and he forms eyes for the man and smears them on his broken eyes, and he has new eyes. He says, go wash in the pool, and the man gets new eyes to see out of. Jesus has recreated creation. He's fixed creation by redoing it, by doing more than what happened at creation. This is why we can be so happy and we can rejoice, is because God outdoes even himself, right? He even outdoes what we can expect out of God. He even outdoes that. But the Jewish people of Jesus' day didn't see it. They didn't understand it, and they were so angry that other people were beginning to catch on that they said, if you call Jesus Lord, you can no longer come to the temple and participate in these religious observances. So everyone was afraid to point it out and say that this man who was healed by Jesus, because they knew that on the Sabbath they needed to worship with the other Jews. In the Old Testament, something gets unlocked for us. In in 1 Samuel, we see that Samuel is called upon by God to go and anoint the new king of Israel. And so he goes to see Jesse, Jesse presents him with 7 sons. And they each look like maybe they would be good enough to be the new king of Israel, but it's God who's leading the way this time. No one's going to go out and just pick someone based on what your eyes can see. Now it's God choosing, and sometimes he surprises us. And so there's 7 should have been a complete number. 7 sons should be all you need. 7 is the number that should clue us in on completion. And yet it's the 8th son. It's David, who can be anointed king. This is phenomenal. This is earth-shattering. This changes everything for us, right? We know that Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead on the 8th day. Our calendars still show it. If you look at a calendar, the way the calendars are always drawn out is that the weekends are always split from beginning to end over a week. So you go down your calendar and you see that the last day of the week is Saturday. The first day of the week is Sunday. And so Christians change, in a sense, that major day that we worship God. Christians, because of the revelation of Christ, now see Sunday as the Lord's day. It's not that we are breaking the rules of the Sabbath, right? But the very kernel of the rule of Sabbath gets outdone whenever it grows and blossoms in the person of Jesus Christ, who can recreate things. He fixes things by recreating them. And in the new creation, it's the 8th day that belongs to God. That's why we worship on Sunday. That's why we worship this Sunday. That's why we celebrate this Sunday, especially in the middle of Lent with all of our penances, all of our fasting. We celebrate today, especially. Today is that 8th day of the week, and we need to be reminded of God's goodness in his creation and even in the ways that he outdoes it by creating anew with his own life and his own presence among us. Amen.